Now it's time for Lefties Losing It. And the lefties in the US are absolutely feral about a recent Supreme Court ruling in the birthright citizenship case. This explosive-ridden rant sums up the compassionate left perfectly. Please excuse all the bleeping.
All I gotta say is we're so Constitution. We don't have a Constitution anymore. No it. I mean, what the Supreme Court, Trump, all this, States of America, 1776, 4th of July, all of it. Whatever we even fought for, all of this and MAGA.
What a compelling argument, but at least that lady is just an ordinary citizen. This next video is a Democrat congresswoman who is holding a series of shadow hearings while on the immigration subcommittee. Check this out.
We have been trying to shine a light on the immigration subcommittee. We're in the minority, obviously, so we can't do official hearings, but I've started doing a series of shadow hearings to shine a light on all of the ways that the government is attacking immigrants and the legal immigration system. The first one was on third country deportations. The whole series is called Kidnapped and Disappeared.
What a shocker. But I think a lot of this could be sorted out with better education and information. But the polar opposite of this.
Did you know that the term good morning was originated when our ancestors were being held as captives during so-called slavery? Slave owners, after spending all night torturing, murdering, and kidnapping their loved ones, would greet them at sunrise with, "Did you have a good morning?" That was their way of mocking us because they knew that we had just spent all night crying and mourning the loss of our loved ones.
And as time goes by and the world becomes increasingly bonkers, I really understand people who choose to homeschool their kids.
So parents can now pull their kids from lessons that have LGBTQ components. All right. You know, as a teacher, I don't give a because I'll just give them an assignment that basically covers like America descending into fascism or hypocrisy, and I'll use Trump and the Republicans for that. Like, I don't care. I'll go after them anyway. I'll just give them a lesson that hits even harder.
But don't worry, there's apparently a coup coming.
Our base has a lot of activity. There have been 4 Black Hawk helicopters, several jets, and several C-4s full of equipment taking off today. I'm hoping that today is the day. However, it may be tomorrow, but it looks like they're moving very quickly and they're taking this seriously. So be on the lookout. I will update you as soon as I can. Insider said it is time for us to initiate. Okay, so let's do this, guys. Let's do it.
For the love of baby Jesus, send the asteroid. Joining me now is Newsweek's senior editor-at-large and Article 3 senior project counsel Josh Hammer. Josh, plenty of commentary and theatre around the passing of Trump's big, beautiful bill in the US Senate. What's the bill about and why all the fuss?
Well, this is the one major budget bill that is set to be passed in the U.S. Congress this year. So it's a little more complicated than that. It goes back to a 1974 statute here called the Budget Control Act, which introduced this process that on Capitol Hill they refer to as reconciliation. It's kind of in the weeds parliamentary terms. What it basically means is that you have one shot. You basically have one shot to pass a budgetary, fiscal, revenue-related bill, not necessarily with a 60-vote veto or filibuster-proof majority, but with a bare 51-vote majority. You essentially get one bite at the apple to pass a clean 51-vote bill that happens to be the so-called one big beautiful bill. Now, the problem is that because of the arcane nature of this reconciliation procedure, there was an individual called the Senate parliamentarian who can essentially strip certain parts of the bill to make sure that it accords with the ultimate goal, which is to reduce the budget deficit. So that's a very fancy way of saying that. It's been very contentious because a lot of people are trying to add provisions that are not necessarily going to pass the Senate parliamentarians, his muster. But this is important for President Trump for the following reason, and I'll be brief here, which is that this is Donald Trump's nationalist populist sentiment in action. Once upon a time, the Republican Party, when it was ruled by a Tea Party, more libertarian, shrink the government at all costs flavor, this sort of thing would have been anathema. I mean, the party that folks like Mike Lee and Rand Paul came of age in 2010, around then, was all about trying to kind of get back to the traditional congressional appropriations process. The notion that you would actually just get it all into what Trump calls a one big beautiful bill is actually very different. And that speaks about the nationalist populist MAGA dominance of today's Republican Party. So the fact that it looks like that there are going to be 51 Republican senators at least on board to get this thing through, my big takeaway, Caroline, is that this is Donald Trump's Republican Party, period, full stop, end of story.
It'll be very interesting to see, that's for sure. And speaking of us, the Democrat primary for the New York mayoral candidacy last week, well, that had us all enthralled. And look, I understand there's some concern around Mamdani's budgetary views and whether that'll take New York back to the bad old days. The front page of the New York Post was emblazoned with the headline, "The price is white." That is quite the headline. What's the concern?
Well, the concern is that he's literally talking about punitive taxation on white people, or essentially anyone on the intersectional identity politics scale of aggrieved interest or victimhoods who do not necessarily meet his ire. I mean, Caroline, this guy is a full-fledged democratic socialist at best. I would call him a communist, frankly. I mean, this is someone who says literally every crazy far left-wing platitude imaginable. I mean, if Black Lives Matter has said it, if defund the police, defund ICE has said it there, if the Hamas crazies post-October 7th have said it, if they've said it, then this guy believes it. He believes in anything and everything that the furthest left members of the United States Democratic Party believe there. This is someone who was condemning Israel within minutes of the October 7th pogrom that slaughtered more Jews than any day since Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. I mean, this is someone who literally everything that comes out of his mouth is basically ripe for a Republican National Committee opposition research. Yeah, because you just can't make this stuff up. I mean, it's almost too good to be true, which I think is why a lot of national Republicans are actually wetting their chops in preparation for trying to run against Mamdani and trying to project him as the face of all Democrats come fall 2026. The obvious problem is that if you live in New York City, you have to suffer under this guy who's likely to become the next mayor, unless Eric Adams, the incumbent, can pull off a major upset. He's not running as an independent. Probably not going to happen. His approval ratings are very, very low at the moment. I certainly hope that it does happen there. But I guess I would just say this. There's this old quote from a brilliant 20th century American newspaper columnist and social critic named H.L. Mencken. H.L. Mencken famously said that democracy is the theory that the common man knows what he wants and he deserves to get it good and hard. So part of me, Caroline, looks at the plight of New York City under a prospective mayor, Zohran Mamdani, and says, you know what? If this is what the people want, then they're about to get it very good and very hard.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. You get what you vote for. Couldn't agree more. And look, and as if that's not even the end of it. It really has been a very eventful week in the US, with the US Supreme Court handing down a ruling on birthright citizenship. Can you explain this decision to us, and what does that mean for the future of the US immigration policy?
Sure. So this case was litigated as the so-called birthright citizenship case, but the actual ruling on Friday, Caroline, did not address the 14th Amendment birthright citizenship question. And I know that's going to sound a little peculiar and odd there, but it's because of the way that this was litigated. So the Trump Department of Justice and the Solicitor General John Sauer tried to make an appeal to the Supreme Court, not necessarily on the underlying substantive question as to whether the 14th Amendment requires that the children of legal aliens be granted U.S. citizenship. Rather, he was trying to make an appeal to the justice that the scope of lower court relief should not include the so-called nationwide injunctions that have hamstrung the Trump presidency ever since January there. So that was actually all that the justice ruled on. Now, having said that, with that large caveat, I'm pleased to report that it was a fantastic ruling. It was a fantastic 6-3 ruling written by Justice Amy Coney Barrett, one of the more moderate Republican nominated justices on the court, a justice who I certainly have been critical of at times myself. But I was just deeply pleased reading this because Amy Coney Barrett was really bringing the fire there. And she was adamant and insistent that the judicial power of which the United States Constitution speaks simply cannot countenance these sort of nationwide injunctions by which a rogue lower court, district court judge out in Hawaii or Florida or Maine or New Hampshire, whatever, can just bring the entirety of the nation to a halt there. This is completely anathematic to the American constitutional design. Really, the craziest part of this was the fact that it had to be litigated this far at all, and that you had the 3 liberal justices who nonetheless found themselves in the dissent. Ketanji Brown Jackson in particular, who was the lead dissenter, was just absolutely torn to shreds by Amy Coney Barrett. It was really beautiful victory, I would say, for the United States Constitution and our elaborate constitutional structure.
Yeah, very interesting. And look, we have a not dissimilar structure here in Australia, but obviously some of those technical differences really do make a substantive difference. Now, some pretty extraordinary scenes in the Middle East this week, or in recent weeks, I should say. It's been going on for some time, and obviously the US administration working closely with the Israelis on those Iran strikes. But following that, Trump has slammed Israeli prosecutors over Netanyahu's corruption trial. Now, what's this all about, and are there any potential impacts?
So I was really happy to see Donald Trump do this because I've been saying for years, Caroline, that the plight of Donald Trump here in the United States when it comes to what I've referred to as the Democrat lawfare complex, Jack Smith and all the various moving parts there, Fonnie Willis, Alvin Bragg, all the various Democrat prosecutors that were trying to throw him in jail on invariably bogus and ridiculous charges. It's actually shockingly similar to what Bibi Netanyahu has been facing over in Israel for at least 4 or 5 years now. I mean, a lot of these prosecutions go back even further there than they have for Donald Trump here in the United States there. And, you know, I don't live in Israel. I'm not an expert on each and every case there, but broadly speaking, they're based on what I reviewed. I mean, this is just extraordinarily silly stuff. I mean, the Netanyahus accept cigars from a donor and that therefore he's the most corrupt person in the world there. It's patently silly. And it's made even more silly by the fact that during the 12-day war, the war against Iran that was just extraordinarily successful for both Israel and the United States there, they were literally trying to drag Netanyahu and to depose him during the midst of this conflict. The day after the war ended, if I'm not mistaken, the judge in Tel Aviv put out a writ to say, okay, Mr. Prime Minister, now come back to our court there. It's just totally ridiculous. And it speaks of a far left deep state rot, not just in the United States, not just in Israel. Frankly, a lot of first world democracies face a very similar problem here where you have a judiciary and a deep state prosecutorial apparatus working hand in glove there. So for all those reasons, I was very happy to see Donald Trump speak out in favor of his friend and ally, Bibi Netanyahu, because they're actually in a shockingly similar predicament. The good news is this very happy ending for now to the story is that the court actually immediately moved after Donald Trump posted his second of his 2 Truth Social posts to try to expedite some sort of rapid, swift conclusion to at least one of the corruption trials. So already Trump is getting results.
A very interesting observation there. Now, another theme about the US involvement in this conflict in the Middle East is apparently this split amongst conservatives about the extent and for how long the US is involved. So there was a piece in the Australian media this week titled Trump's base backs his war as long as he keeps the peace. Does this sum up the sentiment?
So, Caroline, I have to be candid. This is a very common sentiment, by the way. This is not just in Australia. The American media has been reporting much the same thing over and over again. We hear about this there's a rift, they say, in MAGA. There's a crushing divide within MAGA. I'm not buying it because the polling, frankly, does not necessarily hold it up there. So, for instance, there was a CBS News poll, CBS News, about as major a pollster here in the U.S. as a guest. There was a CBS News poll maybe about a week ago, just after the Operation Midnight Hammer strikes inside Iran, showed that 94% of self-identified MAGA Republicans support President Trump's strikes. Literally only 6% object there. Now, it's very loud 6%. It's very vocal 6%. Tucker Carlson is probably the most prominent member of this 6% there, but it's still ultimately, at the end of the day, only 6%. And this kind of gets to what I refer to as the Trump doctrine of foreign policy. I think a lot of people hear America first, and they immediately think that we're talking here about a hardcore isolationist mentality where America simply does not get involved in foreign affairs. But anyone who was paying any attention to Donald Trump's first term in office knows that's not his foreign policy there. Donald Trump is still the same guy who took out Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian arch-terrorist, in 2020. He took out the founder of ISIS, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the year prior. He was very tough on Russia when it comes to missile defense. And on we go there. So Donald Trump is not an isolationist. He's also not a moralistic George W. Bush-era neoconservative. He is a nationalist and a realist, but he's not afraid to strike out in overwhelming, powerful fashion to defend the concrete core American national interest, with the big caveat that after that, he wants to get the heck out and not send in the nation building crusades there. That's exactly what happened in Iran. It was a smashing success, and that's why 94% of MAGA Republicans support it.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you for that. definitely improve my understanding on that point. Now, we understand Florida is building a detention centre for undocumented migrants. It's been dubbed Alligator Alcatraz. It appears to be working politically very well for DeSantis. There is some blowback. Take a look at this.
Wherever your spiritual place is, find it in your hearts to pray for these people who are lost so that they can become human beings again. Because if they're human beings again, this will stop.
There's always a protest, but you know, this is what people in the US voted for. What is the broader sentiment in Florida around the construction of this detention centre?
Well, I do live in Florida. I live not too terribly far from the Everglades, which is where Alligator Alcatraz is going to be constructed there. Look, this is a brilliant move by our amazing Governor Ron DeSantis, our amazing young Attorney General James Uthmeyer, who was formerly the governor's chief of staff. Now he's our Attorney General there. They're working hand in glove to get this thing up and running there. They're trying to do a number of things, but the number one thing that they're trying to do, Caroline, is to establish Florida as the red state that is most willing, able, and eager to assist President Donald Trump, to assist DHS Secretary Kristi Noem, to assist our so-called border czar, Tom Homan, in effectuating what Tom Homan has referred to as the largest mass deportation operation in the history of the United States there. Once upon a time, Florida was a swing state. This is the state that decided the 2000 presidential election. Once upon a time, Florida was a state actually that, although people here didn't want to talk about it, there were a lot of corporations that benefited from illegal alien labor. All of that has changed under Governor DeSantis. Governor DeSantis is many things. He's a brilliant leader, a brilliant statesman. He's also very, very tough on the illegal immigration issue there. And he leads by example because the sentiment in this state has followed Ron DeSantis there. Again, this is a state that once upon a time was pretty split down the middle on the illegal immigration issue. But as DeSantis has just led through his rhetoric and his policies and just the way that he sets an example there, the people of Florida have followed. But again, I think the goal is really to establish Florida as the nation's leading red state, dare I say, perhaps even more so than Texas, which once upon a time was the nation's most iconic red state. But regardless of how you split it, whether it's Texas, Florida, Tennessee, Arizona, whatever it is there, this is very healthy red state competition. Basically, red states essentially trying to out-conservative each other, all trying to kind of win, you know, the ultimate favorable glance of President Donald Trump. It's a very healthy competition, I think.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your insights, Josh Hammer.